Welcome everybody to a new Game of the Year video. It's been 2 years since I made one of these, but I'm excited to be doing one again. Just so you know, I'm going to keep this spoiler free, but I will be talking broadly about the game and showing video of various locations throughout. Also bear in mind, this isn't meant to be a review. I'm not going to be talking about every aspect of the game. I'm really just going to share some of my most pertinent thoughts and feelings behind why I'm choosing this title for my Game of the Year. So with that out of the way, I'm going to start by talking you through my thought process, because it wasn't an easy decision this time round. There have been so many strong contenders this year. Personally, it came down to a four-way tie-up between Baldur's Gate 3, Street Fighter 6, Resident Evil 4 and Alan Wake 2. Baldur's Gate 3 probably would have taken it if not for the crazy amount of bugs and battle slowdown that really undid much of the immersive experience that game otherwise provides. And as I'll be talking about later, you'll understand how important immersion is to my frame of mind. Street Fighter 6 very nearly took it. It's an incredible game which managed to get me into fighting games in a way I never imagined I could, or would even want to. It's really brought a whole new dimension to my gaming life that I just never had before, as well as being one of the most polished games on release I've played in the last decade.
The delay, fuck. Dump!
Yes! 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 Fuck yeah! However, horror games have always held a special place in my heart, and so it came down to the last two options.
Time.
The original Resident Evil 4 is one of my favourite games of all time, and my most completed game of all time, having finished it maybe 12 times. And aside from the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I believe its remake is the best ever made.
Okay, it's game time.
It was a joy to play, and actually manages not only to replicate, but improve significantly on the original. Something that deserves the highest of praise. Ultimately though, in a year where Alan Wake 2 exists, a game which pushes the envelope of the horror genre forward in ways that frankly felt electrifying at times, it has to take the top spot for me. I have to start with talking about the visuals. This is without question the best looking game I've ever seen. Although the detail and the texturing is fantastic, the thing that elevates it to another level is the lighting. My god, this game is beautiful. I cannot express enough just how beautiful, but perhaps the footage in this video will give you some idea. For my eyes, this game has the best implementation of ray tracing so far, even better than the overdrive mode in Cyberpunk 2077, which was already incredible looking, but this is something else. It's definitely not perfect, and although I haven't tested it both ways, I feel like having DLSS frame generation switched on definitely introduces some graphical artifacts now and then, but it's only very subtle things and didn't take away from my experience. Besides, without it on I wouldn't have been able to run the game with ray tracing smoothly on my RTX 4070 graphics card anyway, so I was happy to live with it. Even then, there were slight hiccups with the frame rate here and there throughout the game, but I just didn't care. It felt worth the sacrifice. I lost count of how many times throughout the game I found myself stopping just to stare at something as I walked into a new room or round a new corner. This game literally took my breath away on countless occasions and had me rushing to share screenshots with my friends. I cannot wait for this game to get a photo mode so I can replay it and go to town with it. Personally, I am a sucker for pretty graphics. Yes, they're not everything, but boy does high quality graphics grab my attention. Seeing graphics of this quality takes me back to being a kid again, when a new console would come out and the step up in graphics was always revelatory, an experience that's much rarer these days. The most memorable example of this was the first time I saw Super Mario 64 in 1997. It was one of the most impactful moments of my entire life. But anyway, back to the lighting. For me, there is more to the lighting in this game than just looking pretty though. It's the realism of it, the fact it looks very true to life, to see light behaving in a way that's very natural and that can manifest in ways that might not be immediately obvious. For example, there is so much secondary illumination caused by light bouncing multiple times from surfaces and objects that it means a lot of the time you don't even need your torch out to see where you're going. It's the same reason why in the middle of the night you might be able to navigate your way to the bathroom via the dim light from another room. This isn't to say the torch isn't needed though. There is a difference between having enough light to see where you're going and having enough light to see things in detail. And if there is no light sources at all, then it's completely pitch black, as it should be. It's just lovely how the light softly blends out into blackness. So many games have really distinct edges where the areas of darkness are, and in this game it's just a really soft and smooth gradation. Now, I'm fully aware that secondary illumination isn't a new idea in gaming, but it's just the way it's implemented here. Horror games are all about how you feel, and it feels to me like there's an extra layer of realism here that enhances the level of immersion and atmosphere in a way I've never experienced before, both of which being things that are so important to a horror title. I'd go as far as to say that horror games live or die by those two things, and the lighting here elevates an already thrilling experience to new heights. By the way, if you're interested in a thorough technical analysis of the ray tracing in this game, I highly recommend checking out Digital Foundry's YouTube video, which I will link in the description below. They managed to capture some amazing footage where they demonstrate in the finer details exactly what ray tracing is doing for the image. If you're anything like me, there's nothing worse than horror games where the plot is some loosely cobbled together collection of themes with no real narrative thread to take you from beginning to end. And if there is, it's so obscure as to not really grab your attention as you play the game. This seems to represent the vast majority of indie horror titles these days. Too often, the plot is just a loose excuse to set up some cheap jump scares. I feel like everyone played Amnesia in 2010, loved it, and somehow decided that game should be a template for every horror game moving forward. Notes and keys and vague dialogue does not a horror game make, or at least a good one anyway. It worked for Amnesia, but that doesn't mean every game should copy and paste that style and expect to make an enjoyable experience. Now, mainstream horror doesn't escape this kind of criticism either. It's for similar reasons that I feel the plot in Evil Within 2 is miles better than the first game, because in the first one nothing makes any sense until the credits roll, by which time it's way too late to appreciate the story beats that do happen throughout. With the second game, however, it's clear what's going on from the outset. The first game tried way too hard to set up its twist. That is not to say that a horror game shouldn't have some mystery to it, but at some point you need some answers at the very least. Otherwise you'll be left wondering what was the whole point of it all, and I find that to be a very unsatisfying experience as a gamer. Where horror games fail then, is when they give you questions, and instead of giving you answers, just keep giving you more questions. The question and answer ratio, if you will, has to be in balance. If the plot of a horror game is too mysterious, if what is happening is too unclear, then the plot isn't having an impact on the player. It's happening separately from the player, and it is not being truly enjoyed, simply witnessed. On the flip side, if the plot of a horror game is too clear, then it's not as interesting, and the lack of any uncertainty limits the anxiety and suspense that you can create in the player's mind through the other symbiotic design choices in the game. The narrative of Alan Wake 2 treads the line between clarity and mystery expertly, keeping you guessing and throwing in twists and turns from start to finish, but at the same time regularly giving you more insight into what's going on, while also leaving many things open to interpretation, ensuring you always have more to think about. It drives everything forward and makes you want to keep playing. It's an interwoven narrative puzzle, and I believe it has enough complexity that it will still feel fresh on a third playthrough. Now, not all gamers care about games having an interesting plot. I know many are just happy to have an enjoyable gameplay, and if a game can hit that, that's all they really care about. But I definitely fall into the camp that likes a good story in my games, to the point that games that try hard with the plot but have some rough edges will still capture my attention, even if they don't perhaps nail everything. I cite The Sinking City here as a perfect example.
Bring me that dirtbag, Lewis. He and I are due a reckoning. Do this for me, and I'll help you with anything you need.
Stories capture my curiosity and attention, not just in gaming, but in films, books, and even real life. They take my mind to another place. They make me feel more alive. I love to be immersed, inspired, and made to feel things. If a game can do that, then it will elevate the experience for me. It will make me pay more attention and take things in better. If a game can maintain that consistently throughout, those are the games that truly leave a deep and lasting impact on me, and it's for that reason that Baldur's Gate 3 didn't, because it broke the immersion too regularly and too consistently for me to take the game in as it was intended. It frustrated me too much. my attention wandered too often. Level design wise, you won't find much you haven't seen before if you've played a lot of horror games, but that's okay because the execution is masterful in both design and atmosphere, creating a pervasive and terrifying tension across an assortment of classic horror locations. The creepiness factor is through the roof. The design is linear, but with open zones so you don't feel hemmed in at any time. Some people will still feel restricted, but for my tastes, I love the tight gameplay design afforded by this approach, with no wasted space or fluff. The zones can feel very interconnected, with different routes you can take to get to the same place, and it really adds interest to the experience as you fight your way through the visceral combat encounters that this game has to offer. Amongst others, certain sequences reminded me of sections of the Metro series, American Horror Story and The Shining, which really put a smile on my face. There was also several times a new area was coming up and I was able to see from a distance what I was heading towards, and the presentation was such it allowed ample time for me to build a picture in my head about what horrors might await me there. I really enjoyed the NPC integration in this game. As much effort has been made into writing the dialogue for background chatter between NPCs as for the dialogue of primary characters in the game. NPCs are always talking about something relevant, something you're already thinking about perhaps, and it never feels unnecessary or like it's filler, and it really just elevates the world design and helps to make it feel like a real world with real people, rather than just a game world. It all feels very believable, like it could really be happening. As you explore, there are plenty of things that happen to give more detail to the world, such as a radio talk show and TV adverts that bring character, amusement and further dimension to the experience. Probably the only criticism I have is that there is a cabin that's literally copy and pasted a few times throughout the side content, which I felt was a bit of a shame, but I can forgive it because all the interiors are just absolutely beautiful, with plenty of clutter laid out to make places feel lived in. Great effort has been made to reduce the amount of loading screens being you just staring at an image. This isn't to say there are none, but where possible they've hidden them and they contain dialogue to continue the plot while loading between areas is happening. I don't really want to say too much about the gameplay so that you can discover it for yourself, but the locations are affected by and integrated into the plot in a really cool way. There is, for my tastes, just the right balance of combat and exploration, with plenty of time to drink in the atmosphere. Exploration itself feels rewarding and tense, and I enjoyed exploring thoroughly. The puzzles I mostly enjoyed. There is a repeat puzzle as side content throughout that was at times so vague I had to skip a couple, but in general puzzles are fun, and although a little handholdy at times, it's definitely not like God of War Ragnarok where it solves the puzzle for you without being asked, which turned me off that game completely. There were one or two other puzzles which I had to skip because I couldn't figure out. I felt like I had the correct solution, but it just wasn't working. Maybe I messed up, but I really got the sense the design was a bit off. The combat isn't going to win any awards, but it was fun and visceral enough for my tastes to serve the purpose of the survival horror aspect of the experience, even if I did occasionally feel like headshots were missing their mark when they shouldn't. To a certain extent, it's possible to stealth your way past enemies, which I took advantage of at times, and led to some creepy moments. As usual, I did what I normally do these days with survival horror, which is play it on normal only to struggle to have enough room for the excess of resources I ended up with. I would probably have been better off playing it on hard, but perhaps that will be my second playthrough. A mark of a good horror game is when you find yourself proceeding slowly through the areas, making sure you check all your corners and preparing yourself for anything at any time, compulsively reloading as you go. A good portion of the playtime of horror games comes from the expectation the player is moving slowly through it, out of fear, and if the player feels confident enough to just run through it all without a care in the world, the horror aspect has failed. This game doesn't have that problem. At times it even had me not wanting to push forward until I had taken a moment and a deep breath or six. From the gameplay and world design to the plot, the visuals and sound design, everything serves the singular vision of this game, which is the way it should be if you want to create an incredibly immersive experience, which is exactly what this game is all about. In fact, it's one of the most immersive games I've ever played. For me personally, this game is the ideal horror game. The kind of game that I dream about when I think about horror game design, which I do frequently. There's not much in gaming I love more than the blend of survival horror with a great story. I've also never played a game where the music was so tightly integrated into the plot. The soundtrack puts a punctuation mark at the end of your experiences of horror and lifts you emotionally into another place. No place was this particularly more evident than for one gameplay sequence in particular, which I'm going to say absolutely nothing about. If you know, you know, and if you don't, I can't wait until you get to experience it for yourself. But not everything about this game can be quantified analytically. This is also a game about moments. Big moments in the plot that leave you open-mouthed, gaping at the end of chapter screen with eyes wide. Moments that scare the living daylights out of you, that drive you forward, that make you throw ammo conservation to the wind and unload every bullet in your gun for a sudden need to put down an enemy as fast as possible. Thoughtful moments that inspire, that make you want to get into the headspace of a particular character for a minute before you push on. Dialogue moments that leave an impact that you can't stop thinking about afterwards. Musical moments that bring your emotions to overwhelming levels. I laughed, I cried, I cheered. This game is magical in a way that the occasional frame rate hitch and the smattering of unnecessary full-screen jump scares just cannot undo. The gameplay and storyline are integrated in such clever and interesting ways. The plot holds your attention throughout. The psychology at play is incredibly interesting and inspiring. The audio and music elevate everything. The lighting feels like a new chapter in game visuals, and as a bonus, it's really funny at times too. This is more than just a game. It's an experience that frequently breaks out of its own boundaries, blending multiple art forms together and becomes something more as a result. It is art. The team at Remedy Entertainment have truly achieved something magnificent here, and it is for these reasons that I feel compelled to say that Alan Wake 2 is my Game of the Year 2023. I'll see you in the dark place.